Hello, everyone. So good to see some smiling panelist faces on the Zoom chat today. I'm Janelle, and I'm excited to be hosting this episode of Game Changers. And while we're waiting for folks to join, it would be wonderful if everyone could drop their name and their location in the chat so we know who is dialing in and listening. And while everyone is doing that, just some light icebreaker questions around, the importance of AI while we're onboarding folks. From our panelists, what's been the biggest shift in this, hot topic of AI that's changing the way your team talks about it, from experimentation to performance? Any new and hot tips coming from your worlds as of today?
I can go first, Janelle, on that. Hello, everybody. Agi Goraba. And what I've really noticed just over the last 6 weeks, that was a significant shift on how we talk about AI, just in a different context these days, is with the advent of a lot of the coding agents that's been coming out and how that sort of shifted the landscape. Suddenly, this whole topic became so much more urgent than it was even before. And I thought it was an urgent topic before, but that urgency has really, really picked up among our leadership team, both on a company level and within my HR team. And the fact on how do we shift now just the discussion and the vision around it into actual reality and very pragmatic next steps on what do we do. That for me has been a significant shift over this last, I would say, 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. So that's been interesting.
Great.
I would say that, oh, sorry. Do you want to go ahead, Alana?
No, you please.
Okay. I think because we've been driving a lot of this transformation internally in our organization since pretty much this time last year is when we really started to kick off more of an intentional focus on where we're going to leverage tools and transforming our day-to-day. We've gone past that initial phase of, use the tools, test them out, usage, adoption, those types of metrics, to like, okay, now everyone's really using it, gotten more comfortable with a lot of the Gen AI tools. Okay, now what? Where do we go? How do we really rethink our workflows or the way that we've always done work in a certain capacity across our functional areas, our teams? And also, we've invested in different tools, whether they're different generative sort of generative AI tools, different coding tools, or maybe some things that are maybe more functionally specific. How do we think about the orchestration of like different tools and how they may talk to each other, work together, especially like the AI tools that we use in the people function? Like we have an AI driven performance, tool. But we also have a workforce operations tool, but we're also trying to use, what we have built with our AI employees to be like a growth coach, but that should connect back to our performance reviews and one-on-ones. How are we actually orchestrating these tools to work together in tandem with each other, which is a pretty big shift from like the pre-AI SaaS era to the post-AI SaaS era, where everything was more about disparate tools. And now it's about, okay, you've got different tools for different things. Let's think about the orchestration of those and how do we actually dynamically engage as and what's that center point? So the conversation's shifted more towards that.
Amazing. Alana, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think Agnes and Sarika, those are incredible thoughts and very aligned with, I think, a lot of what we are seeing and feeling at Guild. I will say the recent releases of Claude and Cowork and GPT 5.3, they are incredible. And just reading about how, all the content around how these tools are essentially building themselves at this point. And so the speed of actually bringing them to market and the speed and ability with which they can kind of enable work to shift dramatically is, it is both wildly exciting and also very hard to keep up with. And I think that's what so many of us and I think, we go from these releases, these updates, we go from, I think, Sarika, what you were talking about, which is how are we operationalizing across tools and across systems, to, oh my gosh, now we're back in experimentation mode because there's so much more that just got unlocked in terms of what could be. And so it's a very exciting time, but it also, I think, when you look at the role of us as HR leaders, especially when we are tasked with driving transformation through AI, I think you think about how can we be the ones who are actually creating clarity for employees in what is most important and how to experiment and drive outcomes in your work. Well, we too are seemingly always in this place of playing catch up. So it is a fun conundrum, but one that I feel like we experience daily.
Amazing. Well, I have a feeling this is going to be a fantastic panel because we've already got some really juicy topics. And as I'm sharing my screen so we can go over our topics for today, we had a person come back from maternity leave on my team earlier today, actually. And they had said, wow, what's been going on with AI? This feels completely, that we've moved 10 years, in 6 months. And I think when you kind of step away from it, you actually see how much it's really influenced things. And so with that, that's a perfect segue to welcome everybody to our 17th episode of HR GameChangers. This one is the Q1 reset, where we're going to be talking about linking performance to AI readiness and adoption. And so if this is your first time to GameChangers, welcome. As I mentioned, this is our 17th episode. And during these sessions, we explore how leaders can integrate AI readiness into performance goals, accelerate adoption, and boost workforce productivity. And if you have peers or colleagues that would like to join this series now or in the future, I'll go ahead and drop the link in the chat, and there will be live Q&A throughout. So I already see some exciting discourse going on in the chat. Feel free to drop any questions you have, and we'll make sure to ask our panel. So let's go ahead and introduce our amazing speakers. So like I said, I'm Janelle Henry. I'm your moderator. I currently work at Stripe in talent and brand. And prior to that, I was at a company called Rad AI, where we were actually customers and still are of GoProfiles. We loved the platform, loved how it drove engagement, culture, and growth, and just really happy to continue engaging leaders in these really interesting discussions, and grateful for GoProfiles for bringing us all together. So today, like I mentioned, we're talking about the Q1 reset. And this session, we're going to show how HR leaders tie together AI readiness, as I mentioned, directly to performance, productivity, and results. So without further ado, let's get to meet this fantastic group of panelists. Up first, Lana Brandes, would you like to welcome yourself to this group? And we always start off with the same way. Could you share a little bit about your first paid job and then your most recent paid job?
Absolutely. And thank you all for welcoming me to this space. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about something that is so much occupying so many of our brain spaces and minds and conversations. My first job, or my first paid job, was at the age of 14 years old. I worked at a Dunkin' Donuts in Hackensack, New Jersey.
Wow.
Yes, I literally went and I got my working papers, and the next day went and applied for a job. And I remember that job like it was yesterday, and the amount of learnings that I had. I worked I think the 5 a.m. to noon shift. So lots of morning coffee rush. Yes, absolutely. And I worked many kind of customer service jobs since then, and still do. In my last or current paid job, which is as the Chief People Officer with Guild. Guild is an organization that partners with lots of enterprise customers, both nationally and multinational organizations, to help support growing talent pipelines from within through learning, through skilling, and through education programs that drive career mobility and pathways.
Amazing. Well, it's great to have you. And I have a question about the first job, because I'm sure we'll talk more about the second one. Are you still a Dunkin' Donuts fan?
Okay, I am forever a Dunkin' Donuts fan. However, I grew up on the East Coast where Dunkin' Donuts was quite prevalent. I now live in Denver, Colorado, where there are only 2 Dunkin' Donuts and always a very long line at the drive-thru. So while I still love it, I don't frequent it as much as I used to.
Oh, that's a bummer.
That is a bummer. That's a real bummer. Well, it's great to have you, though. All right. So up next, Agnes Garaba. Welcome, and tell us about your first paid job.
Thank you, Janelle, very much. And hello, everyone. And I'm also feeling honored to be under such great company with all my presenters here. And my first paid job, so I did not grow up in North America. I grew up in Europe, in Hungary. And very early on, I got to learn languages. And so my first paid job, when I was similar to you, Alana, around 14, I can't remember exactly, but just as I was starting high school, is I started teaching English to other kids, basically. You know, that was an era where we sort of just shifted the system, where English was becoming more and more prevalent. And I was a couple of years ahead of the younger kids. So it was a great way, because it was over the weekends and you know, not bad money when you're teaching languages.
Sure.
And what was interesting is that as I also started to learn another language, Spanish, in high school, I also started to teach that after about a year. So it was a really interesting experience to learn it yourself first, and then shortly after trying to teach it, which is a lot of interesting similarities now in this AI world where we live in. And then my current job, or my last paid job, is I'm the Chief People Officer at UiPath. UiPath is also a technology software company, and we basically are an agentic automation AI software company. So we basically we have a platform for companies to go and automate, and regardless of what systems you have, we have the right tools and the right connections to help you with that automation, both on the robotic side, which is our traditional history, but now more and more into agentic automation and AI. We are about 4,000 people across the globe. And yes, I'm leading the people team for them.
That's
So
amazing. That's fantastic. And I love the parallels of you teaching English and Spanish at such an early age. And now we're teaching everyone how to use AI. And you should definitely check out the chat, because you're getting some love from folks from the Czech Republic and also Slovakia. So it's great to see this. This is a global panel indeed. All right, next, Sarika.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm Sarka Lamont. I'm the Chief People Officer at Vidyard. My first job, I'm like trying to rack my brain, because I worked a lot when I was younger just because thought it was fun. But I believe my first job was actually working for a family friend of my parents who owned her own like insurance brokerage. So I was doing a lot of her like administrative work with all of her like insurance and financial documentation. And I think I was about 14, and going into her office. It's mostly like a summer job. It wasn't like during the school year, but I would say like my not like past that, not working for like a family friend or my dad or something. Because I was also doing a lot of paperwork for my dad's business at the time. My
Wow.
first like real job outside of, you know, all of that was I worked at American Eagle in the mall.
Nice.
And I'm actually shocked that they're still around, because it's also a very different store now in their style than what it was when I was in high school and middle school, high school. That's probably like my first like mall job. That was really exciting.
Oh,
And Alana, I wish I was wearing it. I have this like amazing, like oversized Dunkin' Donuts sweatshirt that my kids got me at like Urban Outfitters over the holidays. And I was wearing it. I forgot about it, and I was wearing it for the first day the other day. And my friend's like, "Are you wearing a Dunkin' sweatshirt?" It's like, yeah. And I actually, if my husband's not home making me like an espresso drink, there's a Dunkin' Donuts across the street. So I'll drop the kids at the bus stop. I order it on my little mobile app. I go through drive-through. They're like, "Hey, Miss Arca," grab my coffee, and I go. It's probably like 3 or 4 times a week I'm there. I know. I'm like, I go there like every day, and I'm not a Starbucks girl. So my friends are all like, "Ew, you drink Dunkin' Donuts?" I was like, "Yeah, it's like the closest thing to what's the coffee shop in Canada?
Tim Hortons.
Tim
Hortons.
Hortons. Yeah, it's like the closest thing to that, but I still think Tim Hortons is the best. So, but that was the first job.
And what about most recently? Where can we find you?
You can find me right now. I am Chief People Officer of Vidyard. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me in a lot of AI webinars and chats. I think, Alana, we've been in like an AI Leaders Lab discussion hosted by Zapier. They've got a lot of really cool things going on there. If you find anything around AI and HR, AI transformation, you'll probably find me not too far from there.
Amazing. Well, this is so exciting. And it's wild that Sarika, Alana, and Agnes all started their careers at the age of 14. So look at that, you know, got to start young. Well, I'm really excited to have all of you here. And again, thanks to GoProfiles for sponsoring this this gathering here. So let's move on to our next slide. So what are we going to be chatting about today? Well, we have a lot of good topics. We're going to be talking about AI aligned goals, how we can integrate AI readiness into performance expectations, which is something a lot of us probably just went through performance review processes and have a lot of hot takes on that. We'll chat about skill frameworks, so practical ways to define and develop AI competencies, adoption accelerators, how can you kickstart everyone in your organization to have AI-wide fluency, how to measure all of this, how to add it to your performance metrics, and ways to reward AI-driven productivity. And then we'll also talk about proven playbooks, real examples of HR teams who are optimizing for AI readiness. And so, again, for anyone who is listening, feel free to drop some questions in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing our screen so I can see the panelists all at once. And there they are. All right, so let's get started. So first question, how has your organization mindset around AI shifted from experimentation to performance accountability over the last year? And we kind of lightly touched on this, but anyone feel passionate about saying how some practical ways you all have adopted and shifted?
I can kick us off, my answer might be similar to our other panelists, but I think, to me, the biggest thing to ask yourselves as an organization is like, what phase are you in? I think for Sarika mentioned they kind of, in earnest kicked off their AI transformation this time last year. I think with Guild, it was maybe a little bit earlier than that, but last year for us was really around how are we driving people to get curious? How are we driving experimentation? How are we making sure people are aware of the tools that they have available to them? How do we support them in using those tools? And then this year, we've really shifted to how is AI making you more effective? How is it driving you to grow your impact, to create more opportunity to multiply your kind of outcomes and output, rather than, are you experimenting? Where are you experimenting? Another place, what are you using your time back to focus on? How are you using that to drive your own development or more kind of opportunity to drive impact against Guild's mission? And so that is one real kind of shift that from last year to this year has been important for us as we think about kind of organizational wide AI transformation.
Kudos to you, Alana, that you're in the phase now of, okay, you now have this time back. So what are you doing with this extra time back? We are probably the step right before that, which is we're not in experimentation and like initial adoption and usage. I think that was really the focus from, primary for last year. There's still a lot of enablement that we are doing as an organization, organizational wide, as well as down to the functional areas. But we are in that phase of, okay, now everyone's pretty keen and like understands how to use like more of the generative AI tools as a co-pilot, as a thought partner in your day-to-day, which is great. And that's like a really amazing sort of that initial phase I think everybody has to kind of get through. Now we're more on like, okay, but how are you really going to drive more of the outcomes and really change the way that you work by thinking about redesigning workflows and processes and honestly just being willing to spend the time to think about how you can burn some of this shit down and rebuild it, because we know that the way it's probably always been done isn't productive. We're in that phase, and that phase is harder than I thought maybe it was a little naive to think like, oh, if I could just get people curious and having fun with AI and just getting to that part, the rest is really going to follow suit. And it's not like in the way, and for some, yes, but I think what we're finding is it's a lot more when you have to really rethink how you redesign how you have worked for so long. That part is hard, and that's a little bit of where the shift has gotten to. And I think, whereas this was a big company OKR last year, it isn't so much a company OKR, but it's still something that's important. But the way that our organization works, that if it's not like front and center, it's not going to be the thing that I maybe prioritize. And so a lot of what we're thinking through right now as we're redesigning performance is, okay, how do we drive more of that understanding of where AI is going to fit into, not like you're just using it, but like you're using it for impact and to do the work that you're doing today differently, faster, better outcomes, right? So it's sort of happening in tandem. But I will say we are people are not loving, even though I've been telling them for a year this was going to happen, that like they're not loving that we want to integrate this more clearly into performance. But it's not a do you use it, do you not? You must use it, or you're going to get a 1 rating, or whatever, however your ratings work. It's more of a no. I want you to think about when you're thinking about how you work and how you execute your work. Are you using AI? Where are you using it? And if you're not, outside of a generative AI tool, how might you and how could you in the coming months, or in the next couple of cycles, because that is going to be important and it's going to be more of what you're assessed on. So it's a little bit of both happening. We're stuck in that phase.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I can jump in, general, if we have time, but we are in a similar phase where you are, Sarika, in ours as well. And maybe not going to repeat many of the things you said, I fully agree with, and we are in the same boat. But a couple of things that's just interesting for us is this year is how AI readiness this year is moving into this performance realm, versus last year it was more around development goal, and like, let's just make sure it's part of your development plan. Now it's actually going to be clear metrics and expectations, and how do we craft that depending on different seniority levels. AI readiness for a senior exec leader versus a first-line manager will be a very different expectation on how they use it. So that's an interesting shift. And I think what you said is so interesting about people being hesitant. What I keep thinking about is how to help people, because very often where you would use a lot of these tools where there's repetitive work, like in more transactional roles, more junior roles, although of course it can be used elsewhere, but those are the low-hanging fruits. But very often, if somebody becomes very active around thinking how they redesign the work gets done, they might work themselves out of that job. So that job will not be there. So how do we drive the big picture is my biggest pain point at the moment, on encouraging those folks that yes, there will still be a job. It might look quite different to what you do today, but you have to help them see what that will look like if the role they are doing is going to be a digital coworker going forward. So it's actually quite a fascinating change management piece, because we don't really have the answers to give to these folks on where it's going to get to. They just have to believe in you that yes, if you step up and if you really drive this, there will be a spot for you in the organization somewhere, but we can't necessarily tell yet what that's going to look like. So that's sometimes that hinders these efforts on going all out and fully redesigning things. But I also think half the time we don't have the imagination for what it could actually look like. That's the other barrier, is what that I'm finding is the imagination is our limitation versus the tools and the technologies out there.
Yeah. It's not that we maybe don't have the imagination. I think it's more we don't have the space to be imaginative and creative, because we're constantly context switching, code switching, this topic, that. And there's a really great article that I shared in a different webinar today that HBR just put out about a week ago, that AI it's like intensifying things for people, because what's happening is the promise of productivity with these tools. Yes, you're getting that, but now we're multitasking and context switching even more, because you're like, oh, I have this task started here and this tool and that tool and this tool. I have like 4 different AI tools open myself right now doing completely different things that are all really important. And then I stopped and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like I'm context switching so much. And we all know, and we talked about multitasking even as women, especially, like that we don't do our best work when we're constantly having to move from topic to topic. And I feel like what AI has done, unfortunately, actually, in this case, is added that complexity, and it's intensifying that for people, and it's overwhelming. And so the promise of productivity, because of what the AI and the robots can do, I think it's actually slowing down productivity, because I think we're trying to do too much. And so then that also takes away that space. I was telling my team today, I do my best thinking in like the middle of the night, where I find that because I'm redesigning performance, I don't want to burn this whole thing to the ground. I hate it. And I'm like,
we talk about that sometime. I know
that's true.
Like, burn it out. Like but it's also, I find myself, and again, I recognize I'm a little bit of a nerd in this way. Like I'm so energized by the topic though, because the power of what AI tools are allowing us to do is to redo and rethink this differently. But I'm not sleeping, because my best work is happening at night when there's no distraction by my kids, my animals, this and that, and meetings. So I'm just like, I can't sleep. This is what I'm thinking about. So there is a little bit of that happening where it's exciting, but it's also exhausting. It's creating more exhaustion in people than.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's an important call out. And, something I've noticed around the expectations of AI, even if you're not in the workforce, is that I think people just assume, oh, you're just going to log into any, platform and type in a question and get an answer. And what it actually is it's practice and practice and practice and training the models. And, that seems kind of daunting because that in and of itself feels like a work. But I do think that once people start training and learning, it does exponentially get easier because you don't have to repeat the same level of training every single time, right? It does, you have to get over the hump.
I think that's right, but to an extent.
Right.
I think what's so interesting when you think about connectivity between AI fluency and AI readiness and performance expectations, the fluency itself to me isn't the outcome we should be orienting to. It's like giving someone an A because they know how to use the internet, right? Like it is
Right.
and I think as many of us have experienced, like you can spend hours looking to kind of automate a workflow or build an agent or whatever the thing might be, and actually end up with some good learnings, but not really anything viable in terms of how it's delivering output or increasing productivity. And so it's like I don't expect an A because I tried, but by nature of that trying, there's so much learning there, and that's like any other skill. It's the A isn't for necessarily just having the skill. It's for how do you apply that skill to actually drive the business forward and to drive, to execute. And I think that is the transition that so many companies are trying to make now. It's not just like, did you do the thing and check or, 5 out of 5. It's how are you now using that thing and I think when you actually are looking for employees to do the heavy lifting of building and designing, when you work in a place where there's a lot of kind of cross-functional work streams and workflows, it gets messy before it gets productive. And I think that so much of when we talk about AI and performance, something I feel strongly about is you can't just put it on employees to experiment and build and work themselves out of a job without giving them any direction of where is this going? How are our expectations of your output changing? How do we believe your role is evolving so that you can work in partnership and actually help to move people toward the roles of the future? We're not going to have all the answers, but I don't think leadership can get a hall pass in this space of, employee, go figure out how to automate your job. And maybe you will, maybe you won't have a job on the other side.
That's a really good point. And Emily had a great comment in the chat. She said she told the framework to treat your AI agent like an intern, and it changed her life. So we've got an eager, a practical tip from Emily. So on this kind of same topic, what do you think has triggered the shifts within your own organization? And maybe it's a plethora of things, but do you see it as leadership, pressure, employee, business outcome, external pressure? Where do you feel that the push is really coming from, and is it coming from the right place?
I think for the folks in my organization where I'm seeing a lot of progress being made with leveraging AI, all different types of tooling, some of it I think is not necessarily pressure, but some of it is like they've leaned into being curious and trying things, and they're getting some momentum and they're figuring some things out, and they got some wins under their belt, and they're like, okay, they're feeling more and more confident to continue to be curious and trying that. And I think that is what I'm seeing is really driving a lot more of the momentum that's happening inside of our business. I also recognize that will, for some people, that continues on depending on who you are, depending on what your role is, how much time and space you have to think and all that. And for those that have that space, like we have, for example, we have someone that is like, his role is like digital CS and like automating and using AI in the CS realm. So his whole job is to be thinking about this very thing in the context of CS. So he's making amazing inroads and is super passionate because he's seen wins. And of course, if you're getting positive outcomes with something and you're trying something, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to keep doing this. On the other side of it, where I kind of feel there's the other side of people where they're got some early momentum, when it's like the easy, like the generative AI stuff, you're teaching them how to prompt, you're teaching them what's good output, how to like really work with your own like partner, whether it's Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, etc. But then you ask them to kind of go a step beyond that and like rethink that the way that they can work or redesign a process, they're stuck. And so then they're get back to feeling resistant again. So it's like the change curve is kind of doing a little bit of this rather than like this. And I think that has been probably most surprising to me, just because I feel like in other initiatives or change of my work, of my time in working, I generally see people kind of do more of this. And I have never really seen as much of like the peaks and valleys. Like AI is really throwing people for a loop a little bit. I think where I also see where people tend to have more momentum is if their leaders are bought in and
Yes.
they're making space and giving space and being really clear on the expectations, which not all leaders are great at doing that, because sometimes that feels not nice, or that feels like, well, if I tell them this, they're going to be scared and then they're going to look for another job if we put too much pressure on them to like think about AI. I'm like, okay, well then if you're telling something, if you're trying to be clear with people, and I believe clarity is kindness, you're trying to be clear on like, this is important for you to develop these skills, not just here in our own organization, but like future skills for your like for where the world of work is going, and they don't like that and they choose to leave, they probably shouldn't be in this business anyways. Because we are an AI forward, AI driven product in our own product. So if we're doing that in our own product, we very much believe that we need to be doing that also in the ways in which we work. And so if someone wants to opt out of that, that is their right, but then we should let them opt out. You can't really change that. They're going to be hard pressed to go to another tech company, not even a tech company, most companies right now, where they are not prioritizing this to some degree.
Sure.
Yeah.
One more thing I will add, and we are experiencing very similar in terms of, I wouldn't call it pressure, but I think it is the like momentum, like you have a win, you want to continue to experience wins, and we're really working to like celebrate those wins and showcase them and drive excitement via, sharing wins across the company. So like leadership modeling is so important. I have a belief that we expect individual contributors to be using AI and Fluent in A way more than the expectation actually sits with our managers, which is so backwards.
Agreed.
And the other interesting thing, this actually just came up through not such a great situation, but we actually had a customer error happen, which was not a great customer experience for one of our customers by way of something manual that got, checked when it shouldn't have been checked, or whatever the specifics were. But it caused us to very quickly say, okay, there's no way in this world of automation and that this is still a thing. And so we were able to very quickly take a holistic view of like, how are we ensuring from a process standpoint this isn't happening? And how are we actually thinking differently about the tools that our customer facing teams have at their disposal to get ahead of some of these things and create almost like a double protection layer in the name of customer centricity, which is a very cool outcome. Although again, it didn't come from where we wanted it to come from. I do think where you're starting to see, like, of course, there are always going to be customer errors and things that come up in your business. But how can you look at those as a way to kind of multiply how you are protecting against things like that, and creating and embedding more customer centricity through AI is definitely a really cool use case.
Fantastic. That was great answers, everybody. I definitely learned a lot. So I'm going to slightly shift gears here. And so as we think about writing goals, writing reviews, performance conversations, how are you all beginning to integrate AI or fluency into that? And if you have any practical tips for people who are listening so that they can, go back today and start hacking away, or maybe we're not quite there yet.
I don't want to be the first one to always answer. I have things. I'm working on this exact thing actually right now. So
Take it
well,
away then.
Go
I
ahead.
think Alana, you were going to say something.
No, you go. I'm sure I will build.
I definitely don't have the answers, but I've been like noodling this exact thing on as we're redesigning performance and our questions. How do we want to layer AI, assessing the use of AI in the context of performance? And it's interesting, like one of the things I keep reading about is, maybe not having AI be this like standalone question that's like, are you using it? How are you using it? And it just be this own question, but more integrated into the context of, hey, how are you reaching, meeting or exceeding your OKRs? And then like, how did you go about doing that? And, where does AI fit into that in the context of how you're executing your work? Not so much a disparate like AI automation. And that's the mistake that I made before this. Like in our previous cycles, it was a standalone question about AI and automation and how much you're using it and where you're using it. And that people didn't love that. I think they recognize that it's an important thing that they're going to be measured on. But I think when you make it a standalone question and not in a context of like OKR, performance or how you're executing or how you're owning the work that you're doing, it feels like almost a compliance check the box. And like, if I don't have this and you're only asking me 3 questions in a mid-year check-in, it's 33.33% of my score. And I'm like, well, it's not. It's actually not how we look at our mid-year check-in, but that is how it's being received. So I had to sort of like sit in that for the last couple months. I'm like, okay, all right. So like, what are they really wanting? So one of the things I'm noodling on is like, okay, you ask like a more universal question independent of the function. So like we have a question around like, how did you work? So reflect on how you showed up this year, not just what you delivered, but how you worked. And so for the following, address all 4, and responses can be brief, but the areas are execution and accountability, collaboration and communication, customer and user obsession, and then AI fluency and working smarter. And what I'm asking in the context of AI fluency and working smarter is, where did you change how you approached your work, not just how fast because of AI, and where do you still have room to grow? But I ask it in the context of like, how did you show up and how have you worked to deliver those outcomes that, by the way, the first question was looking back at your OKRs and your priorities overall, how did you perform against them? And that next question then kind of leads into a little bit more wide ranging, is the how, not the what. And then if we wanted to go down to a functional level and ask a more functional specific question, for example, like in customer success, where did you have the most impact on customer retention, health, or growth this year? And how was your approach to driving customer outcomes evolved? So then furthermore, the prompt was like, reflecting on the accounts, interventions, or strategies that made the biggest difference, where did you shift from reactive to proactive? And how are you using data, tools, or AI to get ahead of risk and identify opportunity? And what's one thing you did differently this year that changed a customer outcome?
It's a great
So
question.
I'm embedding it in a bigger question, tying it more to the how, the what in the context of your work, not a did you do it or did you not? And if you're not, I'm going to ask you this question and check the box. And it's interesting. I never thought about that they would look at it as like a check the box and a yes or no, and then that's going to somehow be used for a decision we make about firing you, which we just wouldn't do that. Now, this is obviously just in the ways of performance. How we do this in recruitment and assessing, it all will look a little bit different at every juncture of the employee experience and the employee life cycle. So there's a couple of ideas I'm noodling right now.
Yeah.
I love that. Very, very actionable and specific. I just had one thought I had as you were saying that, or the way to frame a question is, how did you raise the bar on the impact you drove this year, and what role did AI play in that? And so really,
I love that.
Like again, it's not just AI as the end goal, right? The end goal is delivering more differentiated impact, and that, the belief that there is a role for AI to play in how you do that. And that role is different. And I think that is where, again, last year for us, it was really around more of a one size fits all framework of like, you're not using AI, that is bad, to you are transforming the nature of your role, and that is great, and everything in between. Whereas this year, I do think it's important when we are actually looking at it from a output deliverables impact standpoint to get super clear on who we're talking to. Is this person building our AI products, right? Are they designing our AI first customer journey? Or are they someone on our people operations team who is actually automating the kind of tier 1 escalations and finding more time to actually engage in very complex human first interactions, right? These are very, very different roles and require very different ways of engaging with these tools to drive impact. And it's important across the board, but I don't think you can treat them all the same.
Agnes, what are your thoughts?
Yes, what I would add from our perspective as well, and we don't have it figured out. Similar what you said, Sarika, just thinking through it as because we just closed our previous year cycle and getting into this year is how do we make these AI competencies not feeling like they are very abstract, how they are very practical and applicable. And one interesting piece that I would just add to what the two of you already said is beyond some of this outcome, measured outcome piece is also how do we pair them with some observable behaviors that you could set as the competencies. So for example, for us, we have a lot of customers that are operating in environments that needs to be bulletproof, whether it's regulatory environments, etc. So everything we do, and even ourselves, being in HR, a lot of our data is very confidential. How does that human judgment as you use AI come into picture, and how do you measure that through the competencies that when people are working with it, are they actually using the right steps to make sure that things are safe and we protect ourselves or the customers through it? So it's interesting how there are the competencies, but there's also these behaviors that come along that we also want to be driving and measuring. And so those are some of the things to add to what you said in this regard as well, that we are just thinking through right now. And also just generally, how do we embed these competencies for them to stick? We need to think about how do we embed them into the culture? How do we incentivize them? How do we celebrate? You already talked, some of you, about celebrating them and sharing what people are learning. Those are all the things, all of these pieces fit together. And we need to think through that red thread as we are designing everything going forward, for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And there were some interesting comments in the chat. And Angela said, we learn, we teach each other as a group, and we grow, which I thought was really powerful. And Danielle also added, there's a tendency to make the goal AI when the goal is actually the impact. And I think we've heard that from each of our panelists today, which has been reassuring. I think that we're at least directionally going down the right path. So as we think about, driving adoption at scale, right, beyond just kind of the first early adopters or early enthusiasts, what has been most effective within your own organization in driving large scale AI adoption? Or maybe you're not quite there yet.
I can jump in first. Just one example that I'd like to share. And this is, again, something that's evolving from more of a company level incentive around driving AI adoption needs to evolve into more on that personal level. But last year, for example, when we started rolling out agents internally and more AI tools, what we did is we actually redesigned our corporate bonus plans so that a portion of that was not just about revenues and margins, et cetera, that we achieve as a company, but actually we tied the idea generation and how many agents we're going to have in production by the end of the year to our corporate bonuses as well. So again, it was on a company level, so somebody could easily just ride if other teams were generating ideas. We need to think about how do we take it now to that more individual level, but it actually was a really good starting point to think about incentivizing that wider scale, and it was actually really interesting how people jumped in, and immediately we generated a lot of great ideas. Of course, bringing them to life is a different story. Sometimes those are faster than other times, but that was sort of one example I could share on what we thought about. That was a quick shift in how do we measure our bonus when we realized that we really need to incentivize it. We changed our bonus plan, and people could benefit from it if we really achieved that goal.
I'm gonna jump on that because I agree. I think incentive and incentivization is such a powerful tool, and I think that so many companies are getting it wrong as it relates to AI.
Yes.
Because I think that it's like the incentive for employees is like we talked about before, like, yes, experiment, work yourself out of a job. that's not much of an incentive, right? And I do think there is so much, alignment that you can do around incentivization. I think, or the other, become more productive. Who isn't inherently incented by becoming more productive in your role? But at the end of the day, I think what you talked about, Agnes, and tying it to a bonus plan. I was in a roundtable discussion with a group of CHROs last week, and one had an idea of like, if people are becoming that much more productive, why aren't we going back to the 4-day work week conversation or things of that nature? And so I don't know that we at Guild have gotten it right by any means, but I do think one of the most basic kind of like HR fundamentals is make sure that you're aligning incentives with expectations. And I think this is a really, really great opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. A follow-up question on this. So as you know, we've got AI readiness showing up in various different ways across our organizations. How are you all thinking about assessing that as you onboard and hire new people within your organization? Are you all exploring testing for AI or understanding their literacy around it? This is a question I just have a curiosity around. So would love to know what you all think from a recruitment perspective.
I don't know that. I mean, I think that will come down to how like the roles that you're hiring for and like kind of functionally specific. We do like if you're hiring for like an engineering role, there's usually like a test case, like a case study where you have to go away and like code. So there's going to be what we're embedding into that is an element of like coding with AI and to understand how they leverage AI in the code base. I don't know that we've really nailed this necessarily in the other functional areas, maybe in the less technical functional areas. And this is where actually a lot of conversation has come up in our own organization over the last couple of weeks. We ask very specific, like the JD is very specific, shows very specific AI driven like expectations depending on level, role, and function. There are questions in the interview plan that are embedded in that to get a sense and having conversations with folks about how they're leveraging AI and at what level of fluency are they at, and like, are they resistant, not using it at all? Are they curious, or are they like much more literate and they're building workflows, like just to get a sense, and then we can decide role to role, like what do we really think that we need? We're still trying to nail what else could we do from an assessment perspective during the interview process that is more than just a conversation, and we can actually have them demonstrably show us like hand on keyboard. And I wouldn't say we have figured that out, but it's been a big conversation topic. And then in terms of like, onboarding and whatnot, we are actually building a whole element of our onboarding now. Some of it will be part of our automated process. Some of it will be live when you join. Understanding AI at Vidjar, like what the expectations are, understanding how to use our AI employees that we have. One's, Yardley or Kinley, one's a growth coach, one's more of a catch-all, like, and kind of trying to bring people into that understanding. This is how we use these tools. These are the main tools you'll use. Hands-on keyboard, teaching you kind of things. Here's your custom GPTs that we might have and what you might use it for. And that's also functionally specific. So we're designing more of those experiences, but it does start all the way through recruitment. But I wouldn't say we have the hands-on keyboard part figured out during the recruitment process. So I have all ears on if anyone has any ideas.
I think what's interesting around this is one thing is certainly to see how much exposure people had to some of these tools before. But I think the other big challenge when it comes to recruiting is more around potential of people and how they think, because certainly the fact that somebody used it a lot in a previous job is an indicator. Great, they were in an environment where they had access, they were curious, etc. But are they using it the right way? Or is it really augmenting the job and the way they are thinking about it? And that's a much harder one to assess, I think, in an interview process, because you are kind of assessing a little bit their potential for this sometimes versus what they've actually demonstrated. We've had much better success sometimes with folks who actually had less exposure to AI, but they were very keen, very curious, open-minded, thinking the right way. And when they actually get access and hands-on opportunities to use it, they absolutely hit it out of the park, versus ones who, yes, they've done the clicks, they've done the tool, but they can't actually put it all together to redesign the workflow. So it is, I think, a fascinating one, Sarika, on how do you bring those two things together? One is to actual, have you used it and how accomplished are you in it? But also, do you have the right thinking process behind the scenes to actually use it to its fullest extent and to bring that right outcome that we are trying to bring? It's fascinating actually to think that through, and how do you build that into a process for our recruiters and hiring managers to think through.
That's great. And you got some comments there from Nadia who agreed with you, and then Petra also had a great comment of the incentive of AI to encourage people to do more of what only humans can do, which I think is relevant. I went to a conference many years ago, and one of the panelists stuck with me. They said people want a Flintstones experience in a Jetsons world, to use the cartoons that probably date me. But I think it's so true, right? We want the ability to be able to text our dentist to book an appointment, but we also want that dentist to spend, 2 hours with us talking about our treatment plan if we want to pick up the phone with them. And I think that's really where that sweet spot, that intersection point that we as people leaders can, try to strike the balance up. So we've got one more question here, and then we're going to wrap it up. So this is our closing one. And so what I'd love to ask each of the panelists, I want to hear from all three of you, if you could give HR leaders one piece of advice as they reset performance for an AI-enabled workforce, what would it be?
I will go first. The biggest piece of advice I would give to an HR leader is to not put all of the onus on your employees to build fluency and to evolve their roles without the structural and kind of tops down support from your organization. I think this is something I'm really passionate about. I see leadership almost shirking responsibility in this space. And that's not to say that we don't need employees to emphatically embrace AI, to evolve their roles and to celebrate it, and to continue to build momentum and iterate. But it is, in my opinion, irresponsible to put that expectation on them without doing the work of understanding how the business, how it functions, how your products, and how the roles and pathways will transform with this technology. I think companies that include AI fluency in performance evaluations without giving employees a clear kind of supported way to get there are ultimately creating anxiety and not adoption and ultimately impact. And so I think my advice, again, just do the work. It's hard work, but set the strategy and create the expectations and enablement, and then hold the bar as high as you possibly can for employees to meet.
Great advice.
I love that. I'm like, wow, that's like a mic drop right there.
Yeah, I know. But we still got 2 more mics to go. So let's drop some more.
Mine would be along that vein, is the vein of enablement, and I think that's an area that a lot of organizations are missing, and they're not prioritizing that, and I think they don't know that it's really their responsibility, and HR can lean in there. And I don't think it's just HR's responsibility. Like in my own organization, that's a very cross-functional group. It's my AI working council group that's made up of an engineer, head of IT, employee experience, CSAI, like a lot of different groups there. That are all part of how we drive enablement in the organization, and how do we do it in a compelling way, in a way that's hands-on keyboard. And so I do believe driving towards more of a performance culture with AI woven into that, you have to prioritize the infrastructure around enablement.
Amazing. Agnes, you want to bring us home?
Absolutely. And I'll keep it to us an advice that I typically give when I talk about anything, whether it's around this topic or other things around AI, that I find I revisit all the time, that not to wait till everything is perfect to just get going with things. Once you have an idea, just go and iterate, try it out. It may or may not work. Sometimes we overthink things and trying to cook it until it's fully ready to go, and you lose precious time. And right now, I think in this environment, we can't afford that. So, think it through, obviously discuss with your team, your leadership team, but if you feel like it's good enough to just roll out things and testing things out, go for it, because it's one of those times where I think we have to constantly iterating and not wait for that everything be perfectly ready to go before we approach certain topics or roll out certain topics. So that would be my advice, Janelle.
I think that's fantastic. And I feel as though if it continues to move at the speed that it is, that even in, 6 months to a year, we will look back on maybe some of the things we talked about and go, I can't believe that was even an issue then. We've got it all figured out. And I think that's both really exciting and also really scary and overwhelming.
Mhm.
And we'll wait and see and see how it does definitely impact the future of our workforce. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share our screen one more time. And I just wanted to thank this group of amazing panelists again for joining us and sharing all of their leadership strategies. I learned a tremendous amount. I'm definitely going to listen to the recording and jot down some of these notes and share them back with my team. I hope you all do as well. Thank you for all of those who joined us on the chat live and who may watch it later. We will have a few more episodes up and coming. So I want to call out that in March, we will be talking about protecting culture while scaling AI, which I think is a really important thing to be thinking about. And AI teammates in April, a new operating model for work. And so thanks to everyone for being a part of the series. Also, thanks to GoProfiles. It's a great tool, and we're really grateful that they brought all of us together. They also have free trials and all sorts of other amazing things on their website. So thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and we will see you next time. Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.